Hello, I'm Danielle Roberts, and this presentation takes a closer look at the United Kingdom's media system, culture, communication landscape, and how the UK compares to the United States. The United Kingdom is located in Western Europe and it consists of four nations: England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland. It has a population of approximately 70 million people, and it operates as a constitutional monarchy with a parliamentary democracy. The head of state is King Charles III, and the head of government is Prime Minister Keir Starmer. The capital city is London. Now that we've covered a few basic facts about the UK, let's move on to some of its relevant culture. The UK was once a massive colonial power. Over time, people from those former colonies immigrated to the UK, and that's a big part of what makes it the highly multicultural society that it is today. The English language originated in England and it spread globally through British political and cultural influence. This makes it one of the UK's most powerful tools of soft power and public diplomacy. As we learned earlier in the course, soft power is a country's ability to influence through culture and attraction rather than forced. In contrast, public diplomacy is a bit more deliberate, where a government actively communicates with foreign publics to shape perception. In addition to language, Christianity has also played an important role in British society, even though religious diversity is growing. The Church of England is the established church of the society, and the monarch serves as its head. This ties directly to the country's political structure. Over time, immigration has also brought large Muslim, Hindu, and Sikh communities to the UK, which makes it much more religiously diverse today. Although there have been many changes to the role of the British monarchy over time, it remains a central national symbol connected to the public ceremonies and traditions. While the Prime Minister holds the political and executive role in government, the royal family serves as a focus for national identity and pride. Just as we saw recently when King Charles came to America and addressed Congress, the monarch serves as a figurehead and attends international events or other events like coronations, state funerals, and investitures. This tends to draw massive media coverage both in the UK and globally, making the monarchy one of the country's most recognizable cultural exports. Now that we've covered a little bit of the UK's history and culture, let's move on to its media systems. The UK has one of the most well developed and studied media systems in the world, and it's characterized by a mix of public service and commercial ownership operating under an established regulatory framework. It is primarily associated with Hallen and Mancini's liberal model of media systems, although it also carries some characteristics of the democratic corporatist model, making it what some scholars describe as the mixed model. As we've learned, the liberal model is associated with high press freedom, professional journalism, and a commercially driven press. All three of those are clearly visible in how the UK media operates. Media ownership in the UK is a mix of public service and private commercial. The BBC operates as a public service broadcaster under the Royal Charter, which is funded primarily through a television license fee. Major newspapers like The Guardian and the Daily Mail are privately owned and they represent very different political perspectives, which illustrates the concept of political parallelism, where media outlets align closely with particular political ideologies. There have been recent concerns about media consolidation that are causing the UK's regulatory agency, Ofcom, to review ownership rules across media outlets. In terms of press freedom, Reporters Without Borders ranked the UK as 20th out of 180 countries in the 2025 World Press Freedom Index. This is a respectable ranking, but the organization does note some concerns. Some of those concerns are unlawful police surveillance of journalists, as well as counterterrorism laws being used to question journalists entering the country. There have also been attacks on journalists, most notably during the Southport riots in 2024. Additionally, there is a concern around media concentration, with only 3 companies controlling most of the national newspaper market. The BBC also faces ongoing political pressure and budget cuts that have forced newsrooms to close or to reduce staff. Freedom House classifies the UK as free with a score of 92 out of 100, though ongoing debates over privacy laws, online regulation, and journalist protections remain. There were also new restrictions on the right to protest in 2024, along with rising Islamophobia and anti immigrant sentiment. This was notably linked to the Southport riots. In terms of the role of media in the UK, it functions as a watchdog and public informer, reflecting the tradition of the press as a fourth estate in democratic society, while entertainment also plays a significant secondary role. British journalists see themselves as straight news reporters rather than commentators, and the Independent Press Standards Organisation, or IPSO, holds the UK press to those standards through an independent complaints process. Now that we've looked at how the UK's media system is structured, I'll turn to the platforms and technologies driving communication in the UK today. TV, radio, digital streaming, and social media are the dominant platforms in the UK, with video on demand and social media reaching 85% and 84% of adults per month, respectively. WhatsApp leads as the most used smartphone app among UK adults, with YouTube and TikTok also ranking in the top 10. This reflects the UK's multicultural population, given WhatsApp's deep roots in communities with ties to South Asia, the Caribbean, and West Africa. The UK's internet access is relatively high, with 94% of adults having access at home. As more audiences shift to digital platforms, print media is seeing more of a decline. The UK faces growing concerns around AI in newsrooms, online misinformation, and digital regulation, which all pose real challenges to UK media integrity. This has been reported both from watchdog groups and from Ofcom's recent reporting on adults' media use, where UK adults have reported increasing concern about misinformation online. Unfortunately, the tools for stopping misinformation have not been able to keep up with the tools for spreading it. Now that we've covered communication infrastructure and trends, we'll move on to this next section, which examines how cultural values and historical contexts shape the way media operates in the UK. In the UK, the range of diversity in the press can be seen from the BBC's legally mandated impartiality to the openly partisan viewpoints of outlets like the left-leaning Guardian and the right-leaning Daily Mail. This is driven by a strong tradition of political debate in the country. The UK also has a uniquely prominent tabloid tradition, which reflects the demand for entertainment-driven news alongside serious journalism. As Cambridge professor Priyamvada Gopal has argued, British tabloids hold significant political and social power to the point where major institutions have been known to tailor their behavior to avoid negative tabloid coverage. There are also cultural differences and political divisions within England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland. Ofcom publishes separate media nations reports for each of the 4 nations. The reports reflect the differing news cultures and regional identities that exist across the UK. The UK's politically engaged public, competitive partisan press, and prominent tabloid sector all connect back to Hallen and Mancini's liberal model, which, as previously noted, is characterized by high press freedom, strong journalistic professionalization, and a commercially driven press. With the UK's cultural context established, let's look at 2 recent news stories that illustrate how these dynamics play out in current events. The first story involves the 2025 UK local elections and the rise of one particular political party through the use of social media and prominent mainstream media coverage. In May of 2025, Reform UK won 677 seats in local elections across England, gaining control of 10 councils for the first time. The party's rise was driven heavily by social media, while mainstream coverage raised questions about whether media attention itself fueled their growth. Reform UK used social media platforms X, TikTok, and Facebook to go directly to voters, bypassing traditional media outlets entirely. Nigel Farage, the leader of Reform UK, who was also behind leading the Brexit campaign, built a following of 1.3 million users on TikTok alone. This was successful in reaching younger voters directly. Negative sentiment on the platform also drove engagement even higher, and that meant that the more controversial the content, the more it spread. In addition, BBC and ITV coverage of Reform UK was also much higher than their coverage of opposition parties, and this raised questions surrounding media attention driving Reform UK's success. What happened with Reform UK is a good reminder that you don't need traditional media to build a political movement anymore. Social media changed the game, and traditional outlets are still figuring out how to cover that. Now let's move on to the next story, which involves the UK Online Safety Act. The Act requires social media platforms to remove illegal content and protect children online. This regulation comes with real teeth. Non-compliant platforms can be fined up to 10% of their global revenue by Ofcom. There have been various reactions to the Act, with the UK government and mainstream press viewing it as a win for child safety. But there are also concerns being raised regarding censorships and surveillance by international outlets and digital rights organizations. The Act sparked debate over free expression, with major platforms like Apple and Meta pushing back on its encryption requirements. This story illustrates how digital regulation is becoming one of the most contested areas of media and communication policy in the UK, and it connects to the course theme of how governments attempt to manage information in a digital age. These two stories we just reviewed lead into a broader comparison of how the UK's media environment stacks up against what we experience here in the United States. The UK and the US are similar in many ways, but they also have important distinctions. In terms of public broadcasting, the UK's BBC is a legally protected public broadcaster funded by a license fee. The license fee is currently just over £174 per year, and every household with a television in the UK pays it. This model is intended to provide financial independence for the BBC from both government and advertisers. In the US, NPR and PBS rely on federal funding and donations, and that leaves them much more vulnerable to defunding efforts. When it comes to press freedom trajectory, the UK ranks 20th on the 2025 RSF Press Freedom Index, while the US has dropped to 57th, with attacks on journalists nearly doubling in 2025. There were more than 170 attacks on journalists in the US in 2025. Most of these attacks took place while journalists were covering protests and law enforcement activity. Content regulation is another area where there are significant differences between the two countries. Ofcom legally requires broadcast impartiality in the UK. This is a standard that would be considered unconstitutional in the US, where the First Amendment protects media from government content regulation. With the UK's Online Safety Act requirements, digital regulation is another area of difference between the two countries. The UK requires platform accountability in an effort to protect children, while the US has no comparable legislation. This leaves platform accountability largely unaddressed at the federal level, with no consumer protections in place in the United States. Regarding personal insights I had, I wasn't aware that an agency like Ofcom existed or how much broader its role is compared to the FCC in America. Beyond requiring broadcast impartiality, Ofcom also regulates broadband, mobile services, online safety, and postal services. This is a very different situation in communications oversight than we're used to seeing here in the US, and some of what Ofcom does in the UK is considered unconstitutional in America. It was also interesting to see how the UK balances a strong tabloid culture and openly partisan press alongside strict legal impartiality requirements for broadcast media. These are things that seem like they should be in conflict, but they coexist as part of a pluralistic media system within the UK. As for challenges and opportunities, one thing I will say is that much like the US, the UK faces real challenges around misinformation and declining media trust. However, its regulatory framework through Ofcom and the Online Safety Act positions it as a global leader in communications oversight. The United Kingdom is a great example of how culture, history, and regulation all shape a media system. The BBC, the tabloid press, Ofcom, and the Online Safety Act each tell us something different about how the UK balances press freedom with accountability. How a country structures its media says a lot about what it values and how it sees its place in the world.